Let's talk about this. In case you hadn't heard, there's a big fiasco going on because the Secretary of Defense and several other interested parties were using Signal to conduct top secret classified discussions regarding our recent bombing runs on Yemen. And oops, they accidentally included some people that they shouldn't have in that conversation, one of them being a reporter for The Atlantic. So the first thing I want to cover is, why is this a big deal if Signal is so secure? All right. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is that Signal itself, with regards to its encryption, is secure. It's at least as secure as anything else that the government would use for this type of conversation. That's been proven in court. It's been reviewed by all sorts of third parties. It's fully open source, so I have no concerns with regards to the encryption of Signal Private Messenger. However, encryption is not the only thing that matters when it comes to discussing classified materials. For those who may not know, I spent 6 years in the U.S. Army, and as part of my job, I dealt with classified information on a daily basis, and protecting it and following the rules and regulations around it was part of my job. Now, things have most definitely changed at least a little bit in the time since I left the military. That's been 13 years ago, almost, since I left the military. So obviously some things have probably changed, but the general consensus and the broad strokes of how we did things probably still mostly apply. So first off, the biggest thing is that your unclassified and your classified networks like CyprNet were completely physically and logically separate networks. And before you sort of get worried about what, I'm not going to discuss anything classified. You can literally look up CyprNet and how it works on Wikipedia. So I'm not going to discuss anything that's classified. I'm just going to inform those of you who don't know how it works. But the unclassified and the classified networks were physically and logically separate networks. Unclassified networks generally had sort of filtered access to the open internet, sort of like what you might get in a schoolhouse or something. Obviously, the computers operating on it are DoD computers running, that installation's image of their preferred operating system and their software load and patches and all that stuff. But it had access to the internet. Like, you could surf the normal web within the bounds of whatever filters they had in place. CyprNet, on the other hand, which is the secret network, had no access, outgoing or incoming, to the regular internet. Your first instinct might be to equate it to Tor, but no, because even with the Tor browser, you can still access the ClearNet regular websites. CyprNet was a completely separate thing. And as part of running its infrastructure across installations and such, at the endpoints, you would have these physical encryption devices that took physical keys that contained the encryption keys on either end, and those keys were rotated on a regular basis. I don't really remember what the schedule was. It may even vary from post to post, but you had a physical device on either end that would encrypt and decrypt traffic as it came and went, and you had physically separate networks for unclassified and classified. Another thing was that every computer and device and storage medium and everything was labeled. It had these little stickers right here on everything. If it was an unclassified computer, it would have one of these green stickers on it. If it was a secret computer, it would have one of these red ones on it. And the general rule is that without a lot of paperwork and some extraordinary exceptions being allowed, things can go up in classification, but it's a lot harder to bring them back down. So, for example, if you take a computer that is unclassified and you go plug it into a classified network, that computer is now classified. You stick the red sticker over top of the green one, and it can never come back down. You can never take that computer and plug it back into an unclassified network. Even if you don't process any classified information on it, you don't put any classified files on it, the fact that it touched something classified, that's now a classified computer. You re-image it with, that installation's image for the secret network, and it is now a classified computer. That's just how it works. Cables for the networks were color-coded so that at a glance you could see, okay, green cables are a NIPRNet, which was the unclassified. Red cables are CIPRNet, which was the secret. They had to be at least 12 inches apart because there was rules about the random 1,000,000 to 1 off chance of crosstalk between the cables if they got too close to each other. Back when we could still use thumb drives, which that went away with a thing called Operation Buckshot Yankee. I may throw a screenshot up here. But even when we could use thumb drives would have one of these stickers wrapped around the thumb drive labeling it as secret or unclassified or whatever. I even watched 2 field grade officers, majors, get into a heated discussion over a music CD because one of the junior enlisted S2 guys put it in a secret computer. See, his job, or part of his job, was to spend a lot of time generating products for briefings to the brigade commander and such. So he spent a lot of time doing like PowerPoints and slideshows and spreadsheets and collating data and collecting information and making it and putting it in a presentable form. And so since he spent a lot of time on the computer, he brought one of his personal music CDs from the house and put it in the computer, put on headphones so that he could listen to music while he worked. He didn't think much about it. But the S6 OIC, a major, saw a big problem with this because even though it was a pressed disk that could not have data written to it, it was a data storage medium that touched a secret computer. And he walked over and popped the kid's disc out and stuck a secret sticker on it and handed it back to him. You're free to listen to it now, but you can't put it in anything else. So they took this stuff very, very seriously. Classified information could only be handled in very specific locations and setups. And that varies from location to location. So if you're deployed somewhere overseas in a combat zone, you may have an entire building that's set up as like a skiff or a jock. And that whole building, to enter it, may require clearance. But generally in the States, the way we would operate is we would have our normal headquarters building, which was like 90% unclassified stuff. But then you would have, let's draw our little building here. All right, so this is our headquarters building, and let's draw, here's our door. Let's go boop, boop, door. All right. And then within that building, you would have a designated area for processing classified information. And so it was usually like a big walk-in safe, like a big thick door. Like there's actually rules that if you're storing classified paper documents in an office that is not otherwise classified, the safe has to be secured in a certain way. It has to weigh a certain amount so people can't just pick it up and carry it off and things of that nature. But anyway, here's our headquarters building. And let's pretend back here in the S2 office, we've got a walk-in safe. Okay, and let's draw a bigger square, and this is going to be the S2 office. Okay, and let's draw some doors here. So here's the door to the safe. Here's the door to the S2 office over here. All right, your S2 NCO or OIC may have a desk here where if you need to process classified information, you got to check in with them. You're going to sign in. They're going to let you into the vault, and inside the vault would be the networking infrastructure to access the classified network. So in here would be one of those end-to-end encryption devices that I was talking about, and the computers connected to it, and you would go in here, you would do whatever you needed to do on the classified network, and then when you left, you would sign back out, and that way they had a log of who was in here and when. And so that's how you would access classified information generally in the States when the rest of the building is marked as sort of unclassified. And that way you can have visitors come in here that don't have a clearance, and it's okay because your classified area is cordoned off and protected. Now even in Iraq where I was, and when you're deployed and you have a sort of mix of unclassified and classified systems within the same space. Like I said, the cables had to be 12 inches apart. The computers had to be 12 inches apart. So even commanders that would have unclassified and classified systems that they both needed to work on, they had separate computers, one for classified, one for unclassified, and say on opposite sides of their desk. And part of the purpose of all this sort of, I guess you might call it security theater, is that it draws a big distinction between when you're on something unclassified and when you're on something classified. When you're working on an unclassified system, The whole time you're using it, there's a big green banner across the top of the screen that says unclassified. The classified one, if it was SIPRnet, would have a red banner that said secret. So while it did happen, there is not really a reasonable chance that somebody's going to accidentally cross-contaminate and put classified information on the unclassified network. Because to do so, since the networks are separate and there's no shared common network resources between them, you would have to physically and manually plug something like a thumb drive or a CD into this labeled classified system, take that file or that information, and then move it over and put it onto this also labeled and marked unclassified system. So the likelihood of that happening by accident is basically zero. I do remember one instance where we did have it happen where our brigade commander created a PowerPoint slideshow for an FRG meeting, which is sort of like a family get-together sort of thing. And since he was on his classified system at the time, he just used that to make the PowerPoint. And I guess he realized, oh crap, I don't want to remake this whole thing. So he just copied it over to his unclassified system. But what he didn't remember was that any Office documents that you create on classified systems also get marked with the classification of the system that created them. So his PowerPoint slideshow for the FRG had big banners that said secret across the top. And when a document labeled secret got uploaded to our unclassified SharePoint and someone at the Network Enterprise Center spotted it, our SharePoint got nuked. No notification, no hey, check this out. It was just gone. Bye. See you later. They do not, or they did not, play around with spillage, even if it's something as innocuous as an FRG slideshow. So the problem with this whole situation here wasn't just that they were using Signal because, Signal's insecure or whatever. Signal's not insecure. The problem was that it was not a DoD asset. It was not running on a DoD network. And so the possibility of them accidentally adding an Atlantic reporter to the conversation was very real, and it happened. And that's why you're supposed to have physically and logically separate networks for your classified and unclassified information. It's not just about the encryption and how safe is the data from point A to point B. It's also about trying as much as reasonably possible to remove the human element from the equation. And SIPRnet is a global thing. It's not like they would not have been able to communicate with each other if they used a classified network. There's a picture here, and this is when we were redeploying. So I've blurred out some faces of the folks here. But you can see we've got big satellite dishes here. And this looks like the little dish for a Casey, is what it looks like. But we, in the military, had a lot of our own infrastructure. SIPR was a worldwide network. Wherever you went in the world, you had to have the ability to stick a little dish in a chair and point it in the right direction outside your tent or whatever, and communicate via SIPR with anybody else, anywhere else in the world, regardless. So SIPR, as a classified network, is global. And sometimes it's even tunneled over unclassified networks. But it is a logically completely separate and encrypted network that it can't see out and nothing else can see in. They just use existing networks sometimes as the backbone. But it is a global network. And so the White House absolutely has access to these classified networks. The Secretary of Defense, Hegseth was a field grade officer. He was a major in the U.S. Army. He absolutely understands how this stuff is supposed to work, or he should. So the fact that this happened shows, in my opinion, a sort of systemic complacency, a disregard for established protocol and regulations, maybe a certain level of incompetence. I don't know, because if I had discussed classified information, even over Signal, with somebody who was not supposed to be privy to that information, I would have at the very least been demoted. And if it was something as important as military operations, I probably would have spent at least a little time in jail. And these guys are just like, no, it's no big deal. So I don't know what to make of this whole cluster, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about my experience, how things worked when I was in the military, and to talk about why this is a problem, even if Signal is secure. It's not just about the encryption. It's about how classified information is supposed to be handled. And it's not all about encryption. It's a lot of it is about procedures and policies to make sure that in addition to the encryption, that you're not cross-contaminating, that you're not sending classified information to someone who doesn't have a need to know on accident. If I were going to use Signal or something like it for classified communications so that we could use DoD-issued phones to conduct these operations and communicate securely, because I understand they're in the States, they're not in a war zone, they don't want to have to pack around 17 different devices depending on who they're talking to and this, that, and the other. And part of my response to that is just tell them to suck it up and do what they're supposed to do in the first place. Like, part of your job as the Secretary of Defense is to safeguard classified information with regards to military operations. And so part of that responsibility is going to entail some amount of inconvenience, and you're just going to have to deal with that. That's just the reality of how the world works. But if I was going to use something, if my goal was to be as convenient as reasonably possible and to use something like Signal for this sort of thing, one, issue like separate DoD standardized sort of phones or devices. And I would probably pay somebody like Signal to stand up a separate version of their application for use by the DoD. Because in addition to the encryption, which is vitally important, you also would want it to be a logically and or physically separate network from sort of the commercial civilian networks. And there's also concerns about record keeping, because when you're a politician, when you're an elected official or someone like the Secretary of Defense that is appointed by the president, there are rules about record keeping, and having things like automatic message deletion is not really ideal for something like this. Like, the people have a right to know what's going on, and eventually a lot of this stuff is going to be declassified. And if the messages have automatically deleted themselves, that removes a lot of evidence and a lot of our ability to hold our leadership accountable for things if they mess up and do the wrong thing. And so I understand the desire for convenience and to be able to make quick decisions and react in real time, but there's a right and a wrong way to do things. And using the civilian version of Signal was the wrong way to go about this. They need to figure out some other solution. If this is how they want to operate, there are things that they could do to make this work. But, like I said, using the civilian version of Signal is not the way to go about it. So that's my thoughts on the whole thing. So if y'all have any comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm going to keep an eye on this and see how things progress, see if they learn, see if anybody gets fired. At the very least, don't use the same app to message the Secretary of Defense that you use to message your daughter or your mom. Come on, man. You guys know better than this. You're just... come on. Anyway, y'all take care. Have a good one. Marcus out.